The wind wasn't a whisper here. It was a ghost that moaned through the canyons and rattled the bones of every man who dared to stand against it. It carried the scent of dust and dying things, a familiar perfume in this lonely stretch of unforgiving earth. Jack Creel sat the buckboard, his hands loose on the reins, calloused fingers stained with the grit of 100 journeys. His mule Cora was a stoic beast, her pace as slow and steady as a heartbeat worn thin by time. They were hauling freight, canned goods, and ammunition for a godforsaken army post, but Jack was just a man in motion, riding a path that kept him far from towns with their prying questions and the ghosts that haunted their saloons. He'd buried his wife to the cold ground, then his boy to a fever that burned hotter than any summer Sunday. He'd sold the ranch, a place full of echoes and empty spaces, and had taken to the road a self-made exile. There was a quiet that suited him out here, a quiet that tasted of solitude and bitter truth. It was a shield he'd built against the world. Then the wind shifted, a faint, almost imperceptible sense something human cut through the dust. He reined in Cora, and his eyes as sharp as a hawk's scanned the horizon. Nothing, just the endless broken landscape. But then a low shape in the sand, a trick of the heat that refused to fade. It was a woman buried to her neck, her face blistered by the sun, her lips cracked and swollen. She was barely breathing, a faint flutter in her chest, the only sign she clung to life. Jack dropped from the buckboard, his boots sinking into the hot sand. He knelt beside her, a strange chill running through him despite the searing heat. No horses, no tracks, no sign of the men who had done this. He pulled the canteen from his belt and tipped a few drops onto her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, a faint tremor running through her. She was conscious, a flicker of pain in her gaze before she closed her eyes again. Without a word, Jack began to dig. The sand was hard and unforgiving, tearing at his hands, but he didn't stop. He clawed at the earth, his palms raw, until he had freed her torso and arms. She was light, a wisp of a thing, bones wrapped in sun-scorched skin. Her blouse was torn, and a necklace of feathers lay against her chest. He lifted her, sliding, his arms beneath her frail body. She made no sound. Her eyes opened for a brief, disoriented moment, then closed once more. Back at the buckboard, he laid her gently on a canvas tarp, wrapped her in a blanket, and gave her water. He kept writing his thoughts, a tangled mess. She was Cherokee, he knew that much from the beadwork. But what kind of man would do this? He'd heard the whispers of old law, of desert justice, but this was a punishment from a forgotten time, a cruelty that defied reason. He glanced back at her. She hadn't moved. He didn't stop until the sun bled into the horizon, finding a dry creek bed where he could make camp. He laid her on a tarp and sat watching her, the rifle resting across his knees. He didn't sleep. Every time her breathing hitched, he leaned in, a low sound escaping his lips, a broken promise to himself that he was there. His mind drifted back to a winter long ago, to a woman's fading breath and a boy's cold hand. He couldn't save them. He'd ridden out here to escape the truth of his helplessness. But here was this woman, a fragile thread of life, and she was still breathing. In the morning, he brewed coffee, feeding her softened beans with a spoon. Her eyes, when they finally opened, held his gaze. They weren't soft. They were hard, ancient, and filled with a sorrow so deep it mirrored his own. He spoke, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe now." She didn't reply, just a slow tightening of her fingers on the blanket. He didn't press. She needed time. He knew what it was to be trapped inside your own grief. The second day stretched long and hot, the air still and heavy, the kind that held every sound close. Maria. She'd finally whispered her name, her voice a cracked thing from disuse. He hadn't expected it. She was still thin, still weak, but there was a new strength in her movements, a fire in her eyes that had not been there before. He had given her a clean shirt to wear, and she had changed in the back of the buckboard, his back turned to her. When she emerged, she was still fragile, but she was upright. They sat across from each other by the fire, the light flickering across her sharp cheekbones. The silence was different now, no longer just a shared space, but a conversation in itself. He stirred the coals. "Who did that to you?" he asked. She stared into the flames, her voice low, and even a story told 1,000 times in the silence of her own mind. "My stepfather." The others listened to him. He said I defied tradition. Said I spoke up when I shouldn't have. Jack said nothing, just leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, listening. "A young girl was beaten. I said it was wrong. I didn't shout. I didn't fight, just said it. She paused, a muscle twitching in her jaw. That was enough. And your mother? He asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. She didn't say anything. Maria said, her voice thinning to a thread. Just stood there. The shame was a palpable thing in the air between them. He said it was old law, that if a woman causes disorder, she can be buried. He said I was a threat to unity. Jack nodded slowly. He'd heard of such fractured camps where old beliefs became weapons and justice turned cruel. Do they know you're alive? She shook her head. Do you want them to? She was quiet for a long time. Number. That night she slept in the buckboard and Jack slept with his rifle across his lap, cocked and ready. He didn't trust the kind of man who would do something like this. He didn't know if they would come for her, but he wasn't taking any chances. The next morning she was out of the buckboard before sunrise, stirring the coals. Her movements stiff but purposeful. You got anywhere you want to go? He asked. No family left, she said. The tribe is broken. They wouldn't have me even if I did. She looked at him, then her eyes direct, steady. There was no begging, no plea, just a question. A question he knew he had to answer. He thought of the road, the endless circuit he'd been on, a man running from his own past. He thought of her half dead in the sand, and the knowledge that he couldn't have ridden past her. He made his decision. I'm heading to the Bitterwind Army Depot. Got a cabin near the pass. Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to ride as far as you want. She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. When he loaded the buckboard that morning, she climbed in and settled herself on the blankets. Jack took the reins, and they rode north, the wind at their back, and neither of them looked back. The cabin was a simple thing, tucked low in a gully between two hills, its pine walls silvered by the Sunday. It was a place for one, a place built by a man who had lost everything. But to Maria, it was a sanctuary. She stepped down from the buckboard, her legs steadier, now the memory of her weakness fading with each step. She noticed the precision, the care, the stacked firewood, the barrel for rainwater, the clean oil paper on the window frames, and inside a single cot, a table, 2 chairs, and a small, pencil sketch drawing of a boy. Jack moved past her, opening the door. You can take the bed, he said. Maria stepped inside, the air smelling of smoke and cedar. Where will you sleep? I'll build a second cot, he said. Got lumber in the shed. She didn't argue, just nodded and set the blanket down. They worked together that evening, her movements a quiet ballet of purpose. She swept the floor, he cleaned the stove. When he laid the first boards for his cot, she brought him nails without being asked. After a supper of beans and cornbread, they sat outside, watching the light fade. Do you ever get tired of being alone? Maria asked. Jack's jaw tightened. Used to think I needed to be. He looked at her, his gaze steady. Figuring out now I don't. She looked at the drawing on the wall. Who drew the picture? My boy, he said, his voice a low whisper. Eli. I drew that the winter after he passed. Couldn't bury him proper. Ground was too hard. Maria's voice softened. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said, his eyes on the fading coals. You didn't do it. That night, she lay awake listening to his steady breathing from the other side of the room. She thought of the pit, of her mother's silence, of the girl she had tried to save. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of peace. The next morning, she woke to the sound of his saw and the smell of coffee. She picked up the other end of the beam without a word. The day had begun, and she had no plans to leave. By the third week, the unspoken rhythm of their lives had deepened. They moved around each other with a quiet grace, their every gesture a form of communication. One afternoon, a young rider from the depot showed up with army orders. He glanced at the cabin. You got someone in there? Jack's reply was low, final. She's with me. The boy didn't press. That night, Maria asked about it. Do they care you've got someone with you now? He looked up from the paper. Number. She stared at him. Do you? He met her gaze, his answer steady. Number. The next day, she found a pair of child-sized boots, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and tucked under a bench. She didn't move them, just stared for a moment, then covered them back up. That night, she told him about her father, the one who had spoken up for her, and the cruelty that followed his death. If I'd had someone like him standing behind me when they accused me. Jack leaned back in his chair. He's still alive, that man. Your mother's husband. She nodded. You think he'll come looking? No, she said. He believes I'm dead. He thinks the land took me. Then he's a fool. Jack stood and handed her his rifle. You know how to shoot. She took it. Some. He pointed to a stack of cans on a fence post. "Show me." She missed the first shot, but the second hit true. He didn't smile, just nodded. "We'll keep practicing." Every afternoon, the sound of the rifle echoed across the valley, a new rhythm in their days. One evening, after the last shot, she handed him the rifle. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but neither of them pulled away. He set the rifle down. She reached up her fingers, brushing the worn leather of his coat. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. He stood slowly, their faces close. His hand rested gently against the side of her neck, his thumb brushing her jawline. "You're not," he said. "You're here because you stayed, and because I wanted you to." The first snow was a thin dusting that turned the world to silver. Inside the cabin, the heat of the stove held close. Maria moved with a new sense of purpose, her every step deliberate. The silence between them had become a presence, something tangible. Jack sat at the table cleaning his knife. Maria sat across from him, mending his shirt. She finished the last stitch, tied it off, and looked up. "It's done?" He nodded. "You didn't have to." "I know." She watched him for a long moment. "If anyone from the depot asked questions, what would you say?" He met her eyes. "I'd say you're my wife." The air shifted, a palpable charge of static. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't even know everything about me." "I know enough." "I used to want a family," she said, her gaze steady. "A child, a home, before all of this." His face was unreadable, but something in his eyes tightened. "I wanted that too. I had it once and I lost it. Doesn't mean I stopped wanting." She looked at him, then stood, moving around the table to stand beside him. Her hand, hesitant at first, found his. She gripped it tight. "I don't want to be something you take just to fill a hole." She didn't speak, just leaned in. The kiss was not a desperate thing. It was firm, grounded, a silent promise between two people who had nothing left to pretend about. He held her shoulders. Her hands slipped beneath his coat. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, her breath shallow. That night they didn't sleep apart. The stove burned low. The world outside was snow and silence. Inside, their bodies met slowly. His hands were calloused and warm. Her touch was steady. There was no need for words. Later, wrapped in the shared blanket, she whispered, "I used to think I was broken." "You're not," he said. "You don't even flinch when I talk about what they did." "I flinch when I imagine leaving you there." She looked at the ceiling. "Do you really want me here for good?" "I already do." She curled into him, her body a perfect fit against his. For the first time in years, she slept through the night, a stillness she had forgotten she could feel. The snow kept falling, the wind pressing against the cabin. But inside, something strong had taken root. The snow held for days, and they kept close to the stove, a quiet existence of shared work and familiar silences. On the fourth day of the storm, Maria stepped outside for air. The cold bit at her face, a welcome shock. She heard it, then the faint but steady sound of hoofs. 2 riders were coming down the ridge. She turned and called Jack's name, her voice low and urgent. He was outside in seconds, his rifle in hand. The riders drew closer, long coats and wide-brimmed hats obscuring their faces. One called out, looking for a freight hauler. "Jonas Creel." Jack didn't lower his rifle. "I'm here." "Army orders," the man said. "Wanted to confirm your winter route. Send a letter next time." "We figured something happened." The man tipped his hat. "Didn't mean to startle anyone." They rode off, and Maria stepped out fully from the shadows. "They know where you live now." "They've always known," Jack said. "They just didn't care until now." She looked toward the trail. "If someone else comes next time, someone asking about me." He met her gaze. "Then I'll lie." That night, she lay beside him, her hand on her stomach. "I still feel them sometimes," she said. "Their eyes on me. That feeling of being watched. They're not coming." "You don't know that." "I know they buried you and didn't look back," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That means they don't expect to see you again. And if one of them ever does, they'll answer to me." She was quiet for a long time. Then, barely a whisper, "I want a child." He turned to her, a long silence stretching between them. "You think?" "I don't know," she said, "but my body feels different. Full." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I want to know if I can." He turned onto his back, one arm behind his head. "You're not broken." "Would it matter if I couldn't?" she asked. "Number. But you'd want it." He turned to face her, his voice low and solemn. "Especially after losing one." In the morning, the snow had stopped. He came up behind her at the stove, wrapped his arms around her waist, and held her. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The snow melted slowly, revealing the broken earth beneath, and the mud that tracked through the cabin became a part of their daily routine. They had been living together for nearly 2 months now, and every day had a rhythm. She belonged here. The space between them had settled and their bond had roots. Spring arrived slowly, hesitant at first. The ground turned soft, and the first green shoots pushed through the dirt. Maria worked the soil, mapping out a garden plot. One morning, Jack slid a thin iron ring across the table while she was kneading dough. She stared at it, then at him. He didn't explain. She wiped her hands, slid it on her finger, and kept working. It wasn't perfect, didn't shine. It's made to last, he said. That's better, she replied. They rode to the supply depot together. She walked beside him, her chin held firm. He introduced her as his wife, and no one questioned it. That night she ran her finger over the rough iron. I want the words, she said, even if no one is here to hear them. He stood and took both her hands in his. He looked her in the eye and spoke with the same steady voice he used for everything that mattered. Then I take you as my wife. From this day forward, her throat tightened. I take you too, and I'm not leaving. He kissed her a gentle, full kiss, a silent witness to their union. Later in bed, she whispered, I think I might be pregnant. He nodded slowly, a new hope rising in his chest. We'll wait and see. Her hand rested on her belly, a protective gesture. If I am, I'm not afraid. You don't have to be. The cabin no longer felt like just his or just hers. It was theirs. The pregnancy became more certain with each passing week. Her body changed, a quiet fullness settling in. He built a cradle from leftover pine, one leg slightly uneven but sanded smooth and oiled with care. She lined it with soft fabric and placed it by the window. One evening, sitting on the porch as the light faded, she rested her head on his shoulder. If it's a boy, I want to name him Eli. He was silent for a long moment. All right, and if it's a girl I choose, then you will. He looked out at the hills, the sky, turning gold behind the ridges. I used to think the world didn't have space for this, not after what I lost. He looked down at her, his voice raw with a newfound truth. Now I know better. Inside, the fire burned low, the cradle waited. Outside, the wind picked up, but it was no longer bitter. It just moved the grass. Maria closed her eyes, her hand resting gently on her belly, and whispered the words he had been carrying for her since the moment he had dug her from the sand. I'm home.